covering upgrade processes for each major MySQL version. This is really great documentation which can help you to understand what kind of problems you may be facing. So there's information about the suggested, the recommended upgrade process. There's information about changes, especially incompatible changes, which happen between, were introduced between those versions. So definitely, going through the documentation is one of the required process steps before you actually start performing any kind of upgrade. How to prepare? So we are going to focus on major version upgrade as it's more complex and it has much bigger potential of causing some issues to your workload, to your system. So the first step will be to plan your upgrade process. So you have to think how you're going to approach it. So will you be using logical dumps, or you will be using maybe a binary upgrade in place? Are you going to, will the replication be involved somehow? How are you going to provision a slave? Are you going to need additional hardware, or maybe the infrastructure that you have can be shifted around and it will be enough to perform this whole process? Then you have to test your plan. Yes, if it is actually possible to execute it, to complete it. Did everything work as planned, right? The thing is that sometimes it may happen that some differences between versions induce some limitations on you. Like, for example, let's say maybe there is incompatibility change in how replication works. And in your particular case, it won't be possible to set up a slave in some particular way. So basically, some of the plans may not be possible to execute, and this is some kind of a reality check for your upgrade process. Once you have a test database on a new version, it's time to do application checks, application tests. It is very important to keep in mind that this test database should have been upgraded in the same way like production will be. Thing is that it's really tempting to cut corners and save some time, but for example, maybe run the binary upgrade instead of dumping and reloading and leave this long process just for production. It's tempting, but on the other hand, then you're testing something kind of different. So you should be able to do this in the same way as production, and you should be. This is the only way to actually test and compare apples to apples. One thing that comes to my mind is, for example, character sets. If you dump and reload under some circumstances, under some configuration settings, and given different languages that we are using all over the world, some cases this can be a problem. You have to adapt some settings or adapt the dump and reload process to make sure that the character sets are transferred correctly, the national characters. While in binary upgrade, you may not notice this kind of issue. So once we have a test database upgraded correctly, like production will be upgraded, we have to check if application works with it. So we need to check for both logical issues and performance regressions. And for that, the more profiling you can do from your application, or maybe you have you are timing the database calls or queries. Maybe you're checking how long it takes to perform some kind of database-related tasks. So the more this data you have, the better, because you can compare the performance of the old and the new database version, database system with regard to your application. If you have access to external tools, profiling tools like New Relic, for example, that's also great. It's also something very useful and can give you an idea of where things are looking good and where things are looking not so good, and some maybe further tests or maybe some kind of code change is required. So for the performance regressions, so obviously some settings may need to be tuned differently. This is, well, from version to version, additional features may be added, or even the way how the subsystems in MySQL work, it also may be changed. A very good example is the way how InnoDB makes I/O, performs I/O operation, how it flushes the data from the buffer pool. It's changed from 5.1, then 5.5 and 5.6. It actually changed twice. These were significant changes, and basically we are tuning MySQL 5.5, 5.1, and 5.6 completely differently for I/O bound workload. So your settings which were tuned for the old version may not work for the new one. And some settings may need to be added because new features may have been added to the MySQL. Again, 5.5, 5.6 versions where the multiple buffer pool instances were introduced, or for example, InnoDB adaptive hash index was partitioned. So these are new features which are supposed to bring more performance to your system, limit some locking, limit some bottlenecks. But to benefit from them, you have to add some additional config. Query execution plans may change from version to version. As I said earlier, restart itself can mess things up. But also a new version can have some maybe optimizer features, maybe some new optimizations, which and the queries are treated differently. So obviously, the idea of all those features is to make MySQL faster and make optimizer more smarter. But still, it can happen that some edge corner case, this feature won't do. It won't make a favor here, and you have to either rewrite the query or maybe add some index hint or make some other change, or maybe disable the optimizer feature for this particular query, for example, to keep it as quick as on the previous version. Also, for example, in MySQL 5.7, the optimizer cost model was reworked, was changed. So again, obviously the whole idea is that 5.7 will be better in picking optimal query execution plan, but it's quite likely that one of your queries may not benefit from this kind of change. Contrary, it will perform slower. So this is something you have to test. Logical issues. I have seen applications relying on queries like select something from table, where something else, limit 10, and the query, and the application rely on a row order in the result set. This is something which the row order may completely change between the versions, unless you're doing some explicit order by, you can't rely on the raw order. SQL syntax may have changed between the versions. It happened, if I remember correctly, between 5.0 and 5.1, where one of the particular ways of writing a join was removed. So basically the join syntax changed, and some queries which were completely valid in the old MySQL version started to throw syntax error on the new version. So you need to check whether your queries are actually being executed and they are not throwing any errors on your system. The minor version upgrades, they should be compatible with each other after the MySQL, this major version reaches the GA point. Then the minor version upgrades should be compatible, and they tend to contain bug fixes and some simple improvements. But having said that, ideally, as long as you have time and resources to do that, you should be performing the same suite of tests like you would do for the major version upgrade, because it's always better to stay on a safe side, not taking any risks. But as a minimum, you have to check for performance regressions, because they still may happen, and you want to plan for warming up the node, because the MySQL will be restarted, and as a result, this node will require some kind of warm-up process. One of the tools that you can kind of use to automate some of the regression testing is PT Upgrade. This is a part of Prokinetic Toolkit. This tool uses data from slow query log, so you can either generate explicitly slow query log, or maybe you can also collect TCP traffic using TCP dump and then generate a slow query log based on this traffic. And once you have a slow log, PT Upgrade can replay it on two MySQL versions, comparing the results. So theoretically speaking, you're running the same query on the old and the new version, and then the results are being compared. So the queries are checked, among others, of course, for the execution time. So if a query takes longer to execute on the new version, then it's listed in the report, and that's a good reason to take a look at it. But also for the result set. So if there are any missing rows, if the result set is of the same size, if the rows are in the same order. So those are the things that this tool kind of check for you. So it's a pretty nice tool that helps you to pinpoint some regressions and potential issues. I can't stress it, enough that this is not a replacement for a full-blown application tests. This is something like you should treat this tool like a preliminary check, which can catch up some of the issues, but it doesn't mean that everything is just fine once you fix those problems, because it's not only about the queries and the results. It's also about how things interact with each other and how the whole performance of this system fits together. So it's not some replacement, just something really nice to use and check at the beginning. So minor version upgrades. Obviously, this process involves performing binary upgrade. So